Hello everyone, it's me, Clayton. I just got done watching Annabelle Comes Home, which is the latest film in the Conjuring Universe, and it stars Patrick Wilson, Vera Farmiga, and McKenna Grace. Now, when it comes to the Conjuring movies, they certainly are a big part of the horror genre nowadays especially when it comes to a cinematic universe. Especially since a lot of the monsters have allowed themselves to appear in other spin-off movies that converge in the actual Conjuring films themselves. Now, while Conjuring 1 and 2 are generally highly praised, the spin-offs are less so, with the first Annabelle and the Nun generally being seen as the worst movies in the series, and I agree. But when it comes to Annabelle Comes Home, while some of its horror elements can be predictable, I think it's the second best spin-off of the series, other than Annabelle 2. Let's get to the story, though, shall we? So, the Warrens, Ed and Lorraine, played by Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson, in order to prevent the Annabelle doll from causing any more trouble, they decide to lock it up in their personal demon room, demonic and witchcraft holding room, and to make sure it's under lock and key and blessed every single week, just to make sure it doesn't act as a beacon for any more spirits. But when the friend of the babysitter of their little girl decides to open up the case and decide to release the evil doll, several spirits haunt the Warrens' house, as it's up to the Warrens' young daughter, her babysitter, and the friend Daniela, in order to seal away the spirits once again and survive the night. Now, McKenna Grace does a great job as the daughter of the Warrens. I thought she does very well in almost all the scenes, whether they're horror related or just slice of life related. And I also think that the babysitter and Daniela have great actresses as well, but the material they're given is pretty typical. You have the kind-hearted babysitter who wouldn't harm a fly. You have the innocent little girl who has knowledge of her parents' jobs, and also the friend who has a tragic past that ends up causing the whole thing. Fairly typical stuff for most horror films, especially ones in the 80s and 90s. But since the film is set around that time period and very much has a love for the nostalgia of the time period, you could say some of these cliches are loving homages to said time period. And sometimes they work, but other times it's clear they're just using a bunch of horror cliches to tell the story. Some of them work, some of them don't. For example, a big chunk of the second half of the film is mainly just jump scares. And while some of them are pretty scary from the start, there is a point where a lot of it just devolves to where a lot of it just devolves into walking through hallways and a jump scare. Walk through hallways, jump scare. It's not that the film is poorly made. It's clearly got a good production designs, a good sense of urgency between its characters, and the actors all do a fine job. It's just it gets pretty predictable the further it goes. Thankfully, the third act does allow for some more creative scares and a few new monsters to the Conjuring universe, who I'm sure will get spin-offs of their own, given the amount of time that goes into building them up. The first half has some legitimately good build-up and minimal but decently told story beats that do converge in the second half, but it just feels like the scares get a little predictable the further they go on. Plus, even though the Warrens are in this movie, you only get to see them for a few minutes at the beginning and a few minutes at the end. They're out of the movie for pretty much the entire middle of it, which means these three girls are our main characters throughout, and they do a good job. It's just the script doesn't give them a whole lot to work with outside of cliches that you've seen from horror characters dozens of times before. Still, when the scares work, they do work legitimately well, and I definitely think it's not insulting to your intelligence the way that the first Annabelle or the way the Nun was. It's just a little too predictable at points, but I'd still recommend it if you're a big Conjuring fan. So that's why I'm going to give Annabelle Comes Home a 7 out of 10. See you next time.